As well, you can hear these podcasts at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, steinerbooks.org in America and rudolfsteinerpress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 144 by Rudolf Steiner, entitled The Mysteries of Initiation, From Isis to the Holy Grail, 4 lectures, given in Berlin between the 3rd and the 7th of February, 1913. It's a revised translation by Charles Davy. Lecture 1, given in Berlin on the 3rd of February, 1913. In these lectures, I should like to bring before you a picture of the nature of the mysteries and their connection with the spiritual life of humanity. First, by way of introduction, we must come to an understanding with regard to various experiences on the path to the higher worlds. We shall have to bring forward things that, in a certain connection, have already been touched upon in the course of our anthroposophical studies. But during the next 2 days, we shall need certain points of view which may have so far received less attention, at least in their necessary setting. Everything that belongs to the mysteries, in their true nature, is founded ultimately on the experiences of initiates in the higher worlds. It is from the higher worlds that the knowledge and the impulses for practical training in the mysteries have to be brought. We have often emphasized that human evolution in different regions takes on different forms in successive periods. And so is it with everything that we call the nature of the mysteries. It is not for nothing that our souls pass through successive human lives. We go through them because in every incarnation we experience something fresh and can add it to what we have garnered in previous incarnations. In most cases, the appearance of the external world has completely changed when, after our passage through the spiritual worlds, between death and a new birth, we enter again through birth into physical existence. And for reasons that we can easily recognize, the principle of initiation must also change in the successive epochs of humanity. In our own time, the principle of initiation has already undergone a great change, in that initiation can be attained up to a certain stage without any personal guidance. For it has been possible to set out publicly the principles of initiation as far as has been done. For example, in my book titled How to Know Higher Worlds. Readers aside, this is also entitled Knowledge of the Higher Worlds and Its Attainment, and a reader's aside. Anyone who tries quite seriously to work through the experiences described in this book can go very far in relation to the principle of initiation. We can go so far that the existence of the spiritual world becomes for us a matter of knowledge, equally with our knowledge of the external physical world. By slowly and gradually applying to our souls, in due sequence, the exercises given, we will break through to an understanding of the spiritual worlds. The way of initiation can now be described and pursued without exposing the soul to certain events which could lead it into particular catastrophes and revolutions. Up to this point, accordingly, it is possible today to discuss in public the way into the higher worlds. But it must be said also that for anyone seriously resolved to go further, the way is even today bound up with the enduring of certain pains and sorrows, and with some quite special experiences that can have a dismaying, revolutionary effect on our lives. And for these we must have undergone a thorough preparation. I must again emphasize, however, that anyone can follow through everything that has been published without risk of harm, and by this means we can go very far along the way. The path to the higher worlds, one need hardly say, is never closed. But anyone who wishes to follow it beyond a certain frontier must be specially prepared if they are to reach the end of it without having their inner life shaken, not morbidly, but shaken through and through. Even these shocks pass quite naturally over the soul, when the whole course of initiation is carried out rightly. But it is very necessary that it should be carried through in the right way. Now, we must understand clearly that if anyone wants to plunge into the mysteries, everything in his life of soul must gradually become different. The change can be characterized in a few words by saying, for anyone wishing to penetrate the mysteries, the aims and goals that figure in ordinary psychic life must all become a means to higher purposes, higher goals. In ordinary life, we perceive the external world through our senses. We perceive it in colors, forms, and sounds, and other sense impressions. We live within this world of sense impressions. At the moment when initiation is to enter a certain stage, we must not simply experience blue or red or any other colors all the time. Without losing these experiences, we must learn to make them a means to higher ends. In ordinary life, we look out on a clear day into space and see the blue sky and enjoy the sight. But if we want to be an initiate of a certain degree, we must come to the point of being able to see the blue of the heavens as completely transparent. While normally it is a limit or boundary, it must now become transparent. And we must be able to see what we want to see through the blue sky. For us, it must no longer be a boundary. Or let us take a rose. For external vision, the surface of the rose is bounded by its red color. At the moment of initiation, the red color ceases to be a boundary. It becomes transparent, and behind it appears what is being sought. The color does not cease to produce its own natural effect, but initiates perceive something different when they look through the blue sky, when they look through the red of the rose, and again when they look through the rosy dawn, and so on. The color is experienced in a quite definite manner, but for unmediated vision it becomes transparent and is eliminated by the force within the soul that has been acquired through the training that leads to clairvoyance. So it is with all sensory impressions. Whereas previously they were in themselves a complete experience, after initiation they become merely a means of experiencing what lies behind them. Thus it is with the whole world of thought. In ordinary life, we think. I beg you not to misunderstand this in any way. If you compare it in the right sense with other explanations, you will see the agreement, but it is nonetheless true to say that from a certain stage of initiation, thinking in the usual sense of the word ceases. It is not that initiates could ever come to a time when they would regard thinking as of no significance, but instead of being the aim and object of the life of the soul, thinking must become merely a means to an end. Initiates, in fact, are entering a new world. In order to experience this, it is necessary for them, besides other things of which we shall have to speak, to pass beyond the standpoint of ordinary thinking on the physical plane. When we live on the physical plane, we judge things and form opinions about them. After a certain stage of initiation, these opinions no longer have any meaning or value. But as we are speaking about regions of the life of the soul, so different from those to which we are accustomed, I must point out that it is very easy for misunderstandings to arise. When this stage of initiation, which I shall have to describe later on, is reached, then, as a rule, a person will have to lead a kind of double life. For in everyday life it is impossible not to reflect and form judgments upon things. On the physical plane we are forced to form judgments and to think. Suppose you were sitting in a train and were not thinking. You would go past your station. It could even happen that although an anthroposophist ought to take care of his membership card, a thoughtless person might leave it lying about, which would be against all the principles that should be observed in looking after it. Well, life is such that we must use our judgment and reflect. But with this attitude toward judging and thinking, we cannot attain to the higher worlds. a mixing of the two attitudes may occur. One can be so absorbed in the urge to reach the higher worlds as to be guilty of such a lapse of memory as I have just mentioned. However, on the whole, it should certainly be possible to keep these two things apart: a truly sound power of judgment for the physical plane, holding all life's duties in view, and at the same time never forgetting that what we develop so assiduously for the physical plane can be only a means to an end where the higher worlds are concerned. Thoughts, ideas, and judgments must be for aspirants to initiation what colors, for example, are for painters. For painters, they are not an end in themselves, but rather a means of expressing what they want to say in their picture. In ordinary physical life, thoughts and ideas are an end in themselves. For initiates, they become the means of expressing what they experience in the higher worlds. This stage can be reached only when a certain attitude of soul toward our personal views and opinions has been acquired. Persons who have any preference for one view or another, who still prefer one thing or another to be true, cannot enter the stage of initiation referred to here. Rather, only those who esteem their own views as little as they do those of others, and are prepared to set aside their own opinions and to observe quite objectively what is really there. In general, one of the greatest difficulties of inner experience is to get beyond the standpoint of opinions and points of view. Here we touch upon certain difficulties that may arise in living together with other people when we are seeking to follow the path into the higher worlds. Anyone who is seeking this path, or has already arrived at a certain stage on it, will take an attitude toward many things in life through the condition their soul has attained, which will be different from the ordinary one. Above all, they will reveal the characteristic of knowing quickly, let us say, how one ought to behave in this or that circumstance of life. Then perhaps they are asked by those around them, "Why should we do that?" Certainly, when they can appreciate the other person's point of view, they will always be able to account for this why. But first they will have to come down from the level where they see in a flash what has to be done, and take their stand beside the person, forcing themselves to follow the train of thought of ordinary life, in order to show what proof there is for what they see through in a flash. This rapid comprehension of widely varying and complicated circumstances of life is a phenomenon that accompanies the faculty of rising above personal opinions and views and standpoints. Apart from this, we must seek to attain what is connected with various other inner moral qualities. Of these we shall have to speak later. We will point now to only one quality to which we have often alluded. It is fearlessness. For we must bear in mind that when the entire life of the soul is reduced to being a means, instead of ranking as an end in itself, the experiences into which one enters are transformed. In the first place, there will be a quite new mode of experiencing. One is indeed entering into the unknown, and this is at first always accompanied by conditions of fear. And because the whole experience takes place in the intimate depths of the soul, the state of fear may lead to all kinds of inner psychic experiences. Hence, the preparations for the path into the higher worlds involves the achievement of a certain fearlessness. We have to win this fearlessness by means of very definite meditations. It can be done. Only, generally speaking, people lack sufficient perseverance with the kind of meditations required. A good meditation is to give oneself up again and again to the thought that knowing about something makes no difference to the thing itself. If, for instance, someone were at this moment to know that something bad is going to happen in an hour's time, and that nothing can be done to prevent it, their knowledge of it would probably cause them anxiety and fear. But their knowledge does not alter the thing in the least. Hence the fear and anxiety are entirely futile. It is a futility to which all souls quite naturally give way. a folly which assuredly would assail anyone at a certain stage of initiation if our training had not prepared us for fearlessness by requiring us to say to ourselves again and again, is anything at all altered by the fact of knowing about it? Meditants who have worked up to certain stages of initiation then come to a very remarkable piece of knowledge, the knowledge that in a certain sense things are in a bad way with regard to their inner being, their own human soul. Beneath the threshold of the consciousness, there is indeed something that we would wish to be different, judging by the opinions of ordinary life. In a certain respect, it is something quite terrifying. And it would be in the natural order of things that if we were to be led unprepared into the depths of our own souls, we would get an incredible shock. One must prepare oneself then by an ever-repeated meditation on the thought, things cannot be altered by knowing about them. Of a truth, the thing that is terrifying in the subliminal regions of the soul is not called forth only when one approaches it and looks at it. It is always there, even when we are not aware of it. But through constantly repeated meditation on the thought that things cannot be altered by knowing about them, one expels a great part of the fear that must be got rid of. Thus you see from just a few things I have mentioned, that in the moment when we are preparing to rise into higher worlds, intellectual and moral qualities of the soul intermingle. For the ordinary external knowledge of our time, we require only intellectual qualities. In this connection, I call courage and fearlessness moral qualities. Without them, certain stages of initiation cannot be reached. Whether we are speaking of Eastern mysteries or Western mysteries, all have certain stages in common. Hence, for all mysteries, certain expressions have a valid meaning, and can be rendered somewhat as follows. Every soul that wishes to attain to a certain stage of initiation and the mysteries must go through certain experiences. The first can be called, quote, coming into contact with the experience of death, close quote. The second is, quote, passing through the elementary world, close quote. The third was called in the Egyptian and other mysteries, quote, seeing the sun at midnight, close quote. And a fourth one is, quote, the meeting with the upper and the lower gods, close quote. These experiences must be gone through by everyone who attains to a certain stage of initiation. Through inner experience, they must come to know what these phrases mean, and must be capable, so to speak, of living in two worlds. The actual world in which we live today, the world of the physical plane, and a world in which we can live only when we know what is meant by having, quote, come into contact with death, close quote, by having, quote, gone through the elementary world, close quote, by having, quote, seen the sun at midnight, close quote, and by, quote, meeting with the upper and the lower gods, close quote. To come into the vicinity of death. The point here is that in this waking condition between birth and death, we really live continually, insofar as we live consciously, in all that concerning which I have just been saying. It must be overcome, must become for the initiated a mere means to an end. Let us try now to be quite clear as to what we live in while we are on the physical plane. On the physical plane we live in our sensory impressions and in the ordinary experiences of our souls. All this must become merely a means as soon as we enter into the mysteries. What then remains over and above what we feel ourselves to be in ordinary life? Nothing remains. Everything sinks down into a reality of secondary degree. We must lay aside all our usual experiences, both of an inward and of an outward nature. Only think, the blue vault of heaven becomes transparent, is no longer there. All boundaries produced by color on the surface of things vanish, are no longer there. The sounds of the physical world cease, are no longer there. The experience of touch ceases, is no longer there. I beg you to take notes that this becomes actual experience. Thus, for example, the feeling, quote, of standing with our feet on solid ground, close quote, which is nothing else than an expression of the sense of touch, ceases, and we feel as if the ground had been taken away from under us, and we were standing upon nothing. But we cannot draw back and cannot rise. So it is with all impressions of the senses, with everything for which the physical body is an instrument. All that we go through in our normal life, between waking and sleeping, is brought about through the instrumentality of the body, and all this ceases. A condition from which we are preserved in ordinary life now actually occurs. The condition that would come about if someone, while sleeping, were suddenly to become conscious without waking up again in his physical body. This is not a condition reached in ordinary dreams. The dream is in a certain sense an extra-physical experience, but the consciousness of it is so lessened that the person is not aware of being outside all physical experience. This intensity of consciousness, quote, thou standest outside all physical life, close quote, is not produced until initiation. During the ascent into the higher worlds, a moment comes when we confront our physical body, whose hands we can move during waking life, with whose feet we can walk, whose knees we can bend, whose eyelids we can open and shut, and so on. But now we feel as though our whole physical body were petrified, as though it were impossible to move our eyelids, our legs, our hands, etc. A moment then comes when we know that there are eyes in this physical body, but they are of no use for seeing. On the one hand, all things become transparent, and on the other, the possibility of approaching these things with the usual and familiar means ceases completely. Try to grasp what a contradiction this is in the ordinary sense of the word. When we prepare ourselves to reach this point, we find all things are, so to speak, transparent, that we see through everything. But at the moment when this begins, for example, when the heavens become transparent, the eye, EYE, ceases to have the power of seeing the blue vault of heaven at all. This means that the first moment in the mysteries consists of someone coming to the point when they overcome the method of perception by the senses, and also the act of thinking. But what they should thereby attain is at the same moment taken from them. We have worked our way through to the moment where something quite new is given to us. We reach precisely the moment in which this new thing comes to meet us. But in this very instant, it is also taken away. We now know nothing but, quote, thou hast won thy way through in such a manner that thou standest before the higher worlds, and now in that very moment they are taken from thee, close quote. Picture this experience to yourselves, and you have the moment that has been designated in the mysteries of all the ages as, quote, the approach to the gate of death, close quote. For we now know what is meant by the words, the world is taken from you, that is, the entire world of impressions. And we know that we consist of nothing but these experiences of inner impressions. For in reality, there exists nothing but these experiences, these inner impressions. As soon as we fall asleep, when all impressions cease, we normally fall into unconsciousness. This means that we live in our impressions. Now we overcome these impressions of ordinary life. We know that we have progressed so far that we can see through everything. But at this moment a new world is taken from us. We shall have to speak more in detail on this point, but first we want to make still clearer what is meant by the expressions used. In face of this unavoidable halt, with no way of getting further, the only deliverance lies in having developed our inner lives in advance of the actual moment, to such a degree that aspirants are able to carry with them the only thing which it is at all possible to take beyond that point. They must come to the point where the external world actually denies them all power, and they must have progressed so far in their inner development that at this moment, through training in self-reliance and self-confidence and presence of mind and other inner virtues, virtues here meaning capabilities, they possess inner power, inner energy, so that at the moment when the world is taken from them, they have at their disposal a surplus of inner energy. But this brings with it at the same moment an extraordinarily significant experience. Imagine coming to the boundary we have striven for, where the world is transparent, but then it is taken from us. Now we have preserved nothing. We cannot have saved anything but a certain inner strength, through having trained our self-reliance, presence of mind, fearlessness, and similar inner qualities. Thereby we come to the significant experience, one that forces itself upon us. Quote, "Thou art alone in the world. Thou art quite alone in the world." Close quote. And then comes an experience which I cannot indicate otherwise than in the words, "Thou alone art the whole world." This experience becomes ever stronger and stronger, more and more comprehensive. And the remarkable thing is that from this experience in the soul, a whole new world can arise, and truly must arise in one who is to be initiated. We feel we have come to a certain boundary where we have confronted the void, but that we have brought with us a certain power. It is perhaps quite small at first, but it becomes ever greater and greater and spreads out on all sides. We begin to penetrate into the whole world, to permeate ourselves with the whole world. And the more we permeate the world with our own being, the more does it appear always different. We extend the power that we have brought with us to one side or the other, and accordingly as we extend it, we will always experience something different. But at first these experiences will be felt to be quite terrifying, because two things are entirely lacking from them. At a certain stage of knowledge, the lack of these things may not seem dreadful before it is experienced, because in the ordinary experience of the physical plane, the thing is always there, and we first get a real idea of it only when it is no longer there. One thing that ceases is every feeling for physical materiality. Everything material has disappeared into indefinite nothingness, the void. It is not there. The feeling of contacting something hard or even something soft like water or air, in short, the feeling of being surrounded by matter, ceases, is not there. We are concerned only with the qualities of things, not the things themselves. Of heavy, dense physical bodies, only the density remains, not the substantiality. Of fluid bodies, only the fluidity, but not the water or the fluid. Of the air, there remains only the desire to expand in all directions, but not the substantiality. We grow into the qualities of things, but with the feeling that we are growing only into the qualities, that the objects have vanished, all materiality has gone. This is one thing that ceases. The other thing that ceases for the aspirant at this stage of experience is everything connected with what in ordinary physical life we call sensory perception. This follows from what has already been described. Nothing makes an impression on us, but we are ourselves everything. The only impression that remains is, at the most, that of time. Quote, "Now art thou not yet anything, and after a while thou wilt be something." Close quote. But as for having objects external to ourselves, which are present elsewhere, and make an impression on us, nothing like that remains. Either we are something ourselves, or nothing at all is elementary there. Everything we encounter becomes ourselves. We become submerged in it, become one with it, and finally we become as great as the world that is at our disposal. We become one with it. Am I picturing actual experience? It is what is generally known in the mystery centers as, quote, experiencing the elementary world, close quote. The aspirants have risen beyond mere contact with death, but they are, so to speak, an undifferentiated unity with the whole world that is available to them. There are now two possibilities. Either the preparation was good or it was not good. If it was good, then the aspiring initiates, after having poured themselves out to a certain extent over the world, must have so far progressed that they still have surplus strength. In that case, you see that I am describing today from a different point of view things I have often described, but we now need this other point of view, that certain energies which had previously been sufficiently developed, then they now have the following experience. Whereas in the ordinary world one confronts an object, gazes at it, and the object makes an impression on the eye so that one then knows something about the object, EYE, when the point of initiation that has just been described is reached, such a thing no longer happens. For the aspirant is not concerned with the reproduction of the ordinary world, but from a definite point onward they must now have sufficient forces at their command to pour out more of themselves. Thus, after we have spent force enough in becoming one with the world, we must now have sufficient strength to spin forces out of ourselves as the spider spins a web. You see how the whole process of the mysteries shows the importance of developing strong inner energy in the life of the soul. For we must have large reserves in order that all this may take place. Then the following may happen. Aspirants naturally have no physical eyes, for they belong to the physical body. And they have long left this behind. But because we have poured out something from ourselves and can pour out still more, as the spider spins her web out of herself, something akin to organs is built up, and we can discern that together with what we are ourselves producing, something absolutely new appears. Things present themselves not as if, for instance, I had my watch here and my eyes there, but as if the eyes were to send out a ray which formed itself into a watch, so that the watch was there through the activity of the eyes. It is not a matter of constructing or creating a subjective world, but of spinning psychic substance out of ourselves, and the higher worlds we are beginning to live in have to choose this indirect way in order that we may be able to confront them and recognize them. They must first infiltrate our own psychic substance that we have placed at their disposal. In the physical world, things confront us without our cooperation. In the higher worlds, nothing confronts us unless we first place our own psychic substance at its disposal. That is why it is so difficult at this point to distinguish the subjective from the objective. For what we spin out of our psychic substance is bound to be entirely subjective, and whatever uses our psychic substance in order to become perceptible is bound to be entirely objective. I have brought forward these things so that you may experience a definite feeling that all training in the mysteries consisted preeminently in a strengthening of the energies of the soul. That was the important thing, to make the soul powerful, strong, and energetic. From the outset, candidates for initiation had to give up the hope that anyone would hand them the objects and entities of the higher world as though on a platter. They had first to develop themselves, point by point, toward the higher worlds. Nothing without effort, absolutely nothing without effort. So it is for everything that has to be reached individually in the higher worlds. So it is for everything that has been reached in the course of human evolution with regard to the higher worlds. Let us suppose that some being, Moses, for example, was to be incarnated in the course of human evolution and had to work upon this evolution through his spiritual power. It would be childish to suppose that nothing now needed to happen except that human evolution would proceed on its way, and that at some point or other in its course, heaven would send Moses. Moses is now there. We know that he is Moses, and need only carry out what was being done when Moses came. If Moses had been sent anywhere in this way, The result could only have been that those around him would not have recognized him. The point is not that this or that external personality was there, but that a number of persons should be capable of judging what spiritual being lived in this particular personality. One would never have needed to tell these persons, quote, "This one or other is Moses," close quote. One would have needed only to prepare one's soul in the proper way. Then one's soul, without being told, quote, "This one or other is Moses," close quote, would have known that this was the particular spiritual being who was to be recognized as a certain person. This, then, is what we have to recognize, that the path into the higher worlds is bound up with an energizing, a strengthening of the inner powers of the soul. Nothing can be given from outside, but rather it all can be attained only through the strengthening of the inner life. For only by this means can we cross the threshold into those worlds through which we pass between death and a new birth. That is what I wish to bring before you today as an introduction. Tomorrow we will go further by describing, first of all, what the worlds are like between death and a new birth, and in how far it has become necessary and important that through the mystery something should be communicated to us during our physical life concerning the knowledge of these higher worlds. The end of Lecture 1. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, these podcasts can be heard at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of a small cycle of 4 lectures, Collected Works, Volume 144 by Rudolf Steiner, entitled The Mysteries of Initiation, From Isis to the Holy Grail, translated by Charles Davy. This is Lecture 2, given in Berlin on the 4th of February, 1913. From what has been said, we can well see that the ascent into spiritual worlds depends upon the strengthening of the inner forces of the life of the soul, so that through the exercises we undertake for the purpose of penetrating into the higher worlds, we develop forces in our souls which far surpass those needed in ordinary life. This requirement is shown in that when the soul becomes independent of the physical body in ordinary life, that is, in sleep, it falls at once into unconsciousness. This means that in normal life we lack sufficient force to unfold inner activity and maintain consciousness, when, as in sleep, we attempt to live independently of the physical and etheric bodies. The other members of the human organism, the ego and the astral body, must be worked upon and illuminated through the exercises of meditation, concentration, and contemplation, so that they become capable of conscious experience when they are separated from the physical and etheric bodies, as in ordinary sleep. The stronger than ordinary psychic forces that we develop are what enable us to reach the stage we spoke of yesterday. They give us the power, after we have confronted the void, to enter a new world, which we can experience through the fact that as the spider spins its web out of itself, we pour out into space the spiritually substantial content of our souls, and receive into it the spiritual worlds, which then present themselves to us. So now, after having left behind the physical sensory world in this way, and gone through the stage of having stood over the abyss, for that is how it feels when we confront the void, the aspirant is in a new world. And in this new world we not only experience something different, but we experience it in a quite new way. We can begin from an ordinary experience on the physical plane. There, events occur in 2 apparently quite separate domains. In one domain, the events are subject to the laws of nature. In the other, they are subject to moral laws. When in ordinary physical life we observe the events of nature, even when we ascend to the animal kingdom, we know that we are looking only for natural laws, and that moral standards are inapplicable there. We do not inquire, for example, why a rock crystal has the form of a six-sided column ending in two six-sided pyramids. We do not ask why this mineral substance aggregates itself in such a way that this crystal form appears. We expect no answer, except that it obeys a natural law. We do not ask what good thing the rock crystal has done that it should have become a rock crystal. We do not ask what its intentions are. We do not apply moral standards to the mineral world. Neither do we apply them to the plant world, and only in a somewhat indirect sense, and one might say, according to the sympathies of Darwinistically inclined persons, do we apply moral concepts to the animal kingdom. What interests us in the animal kingdom, first of all, is its conformity to natural law. When we rise to the human kingdom, we feel obliged to judge individuals according to the standards of goodwill, love, and so forth. As already said, we regard the facts of the physical world as enmeshed in the web of natural laws, while we judge human actions and psychic dispositions by the standard of moral laws. And we are indeed not doing well in our estimate of the physical plane if we mix up these two sets of facts. We are accustomed on the physical plane to judge the world in this twofold way. Hence, it is not very easy, after one has sprung, as it were, over the abyss of the void, to pass into the spiritual world, where a different kind of judgment is necessary, where in fact there is no separation between something that could be ascribed to natural laws, as with natural events on the physical plane, and a purely moral occurrence, which likewise exists on the physical plane. When, therefore, the point is reached of which we spoke yesterday, we must accustom ourselves to judge events in like manner as we judge natural facts, but also as we judge moral facts in the physical world. The world of natural law and the world of moral law intermingle when we enter the spiritual world. That shows itself at once, for example, when we are confronted with the realm that we inhabit between death and a new birth. When we have, in all earnestness, come as far as we have already indicated, we can and will meet those souls who, having passed through the portal of death, are going through their development between death and a new birth. We then learn to know the kind of experience these souls are encountering, and if we are to form any judgment of what their experience is, we must adopt quite different habits of thought. A few examples will explain this. In that realm we find souls who, for a certain period between death and a new birth, have to undergo very hard conditions. We have at first the impression that in the spiritual world these souls of a certain category have become the servants of very terrible beings, and that it was through their own lives before death that they condemned themselves to this labor for the terrible spirits. We gradually learn to understand their hard fate, and we do so in the following manner. We cultivate the thought of how individuals live in their physical bodies from birth to death, and how, as has often been described in the course of our lectures on anthroposophy, so-called natural death is brought about through an inner conformity to law, when individuals have expended their life forces in old age. We will not speak of this death at present. But there are other deaths. There are those deaths by which we are snatched away, through accident or illness, in the very flower of our lives. We do not all die after having fulfilled our full measure of life. People die at all ages, and we must ask ourselves, whence come the forces which are responsible for these deaths at different ages? We understand that we must die when our measure of life is fulfilled. We have often seen how that is brought about by the spiritual worlds. But everything that happens in the physical world comes about through influences from the spiritual worlds. Those deaths which are to a certain extent untimely also happen through influences from the spiritual worlds. That is, they are caused by forces and beings of the spiritual world. There is something else in the physical world to which we must pay attention if we want to understand the life between death and rebirth. We see the physical world permeated by illnesses and diseases, and in earlier times afflicted by well-known pestilences. One need but recall those devastating visitations among earlier European peoples when the plague, cholera, etc. swept through the land. In this present age, we are comparatively fortunate in regard to such things. But already, as indicated in the course of our lectures, certain epidemics are preparing. So we see what appears to be untimely death pass over the earth. We see disease and pestilence. And the clairvoyant sees souls living between death and a new birth, who are helping those spirits who bear from the suprasensible worlds into the sensory world the forces which bring epidemics and illnesses and so-called untimely death. It makes a terrifying impression to perceive how, during certain periods of their lives, between death and a new birth, human souls have become servants of the evil spirits of illness and death, and have condemned themselves to this servitude. If one tries to trace back the lives of such persons to the time before they went through the gate of death, one always finds that during their life on the physical plane they were lacking in conscience, lacking in feelings of responsibility. A fixed law is evident here. The seer perceives how souls who were morally irresponsible in their dispositions in their lives on earth have to cooperate for a period after death in bringing epidemics, illnesses, and untimely deaths into the physical sensory world. Here we see a natural ordinance to which these souls are subject, but we cannot say of it that, like a crystallization or like the concussion between two elastic balls, it has no connection with morality. These souls show us how in the higher worlds there is an interweaving of natural law with the moral world order. The manner in which things come about in the higher worlds is dependent on beings whose fate is conditioned by their moral behavior in the world. To take another example, we can look at what initiates learn when they turn their attention to a characteristic, the desire for ease and comfort that is very widespread among humanity, more widespread than is generally supposed. People indulge far more in indolence than one realizes. They are indolent in their thinking, indolent in their manners and behavior, and particularly so when they are required to alter their thinking or their habits. If people were not so ease-loving in their innermost souls, they would not have so often resisted a necessary change in their ideas. They struggled against it because to have to unlearn anything is uncomfortable. After having thought so long that the earth stood still and that the sun and stars went round it, it was tiresome to have to learn something different when they suddenly heard through Copernicus about the movement of the earth. It was an uncomfortable thing when, theoretically at least, the ground was taken from under their feet. All the resistance of those times against this new idea sprang from indolence of thought, from the love of ease, for to unlearn anything is tiresome. But one need merely consider the most ordinary everyday life, and one will find how widespread is the quality, really a vice, of indolence. In recent times we have gained some idea of the enormous extent of indolence, love of ease, among humanity. This will be seen from the following example. There are many theories of political economy. I need not speak about them now. But there is one theory of political economy which is somewhat out of date today, but once played a great role. It was based upon the idea that everyone should be free to compete in the exchange of commodities, etc., and that the best social structure would be obtained if completely free competition were allowed. Then other, more socialistic theories took root. But latterly some political economists have drawn attention to the fact that all these theories were in the highest degree one-sided. For what takes place in the world of commerce and in social life is much more dependent on the love of ease than on the law of competition or the law of getting on in the world, yes, even more than on the laws of conscious egotism. Thus, even into political economy, a knowledge of the law of slothfulness finds entry, which means that even in this realm one can discern good sense and a readiness to recognize facts that cannot be overlooked, unless one adopts an ostrich policy toward life. Love of ease is a general and widespread attribute of humanity. And if one follows up after death the souls who were subject to it, one sees how this love of ease persists, and how for a certain time after death these souls have to live in a region where, as a result of indolence, they become servants of the god or gods of opposition, those gods who place particular obstacles in the path of evolution. And these again are spirits under the rule of Ahriman. Ahriman has various things to do. One of his tasks is to conduct out of the spiritual worlds into the physical world the forces which call forth opposition in physical life. Thus humans are, on the one hand, ease-loving, but on the other hand, the fate of lovers of ease is such that when they want to do anything, they run up against a general cosmic law. Obstacles are everywhere. And even if they are not in the grotesque form once pictured by a German poet, they are there in the most tragic guise. He called them the, in quotes, malice of things. This malice of things is especially apparent when, for instance, a preacher in the pulpit is in the midst of a tremendously long tirade and a fly alights on his nose, causing him to sneeze violently. That is the malice of things. But it appears first in full force when persons who, in this sense, are the children of misfortune, are exposed to it at every step. Friedrich Theodor Fischer once wrote a novel in which someone was continually exposed to this malice of things. In truth, these things rise from the grotesque to the tragic. All such obstacles are directed from the spiritual worlds, and the Lord of opposition is Ahriman. Souls that are lovers of ease make themselves into servants of Ahriman for a certain time between death and a new birth. On the whole, it is not so terrible to see the punishment of the devotees of ease as it is to see the souls who are living in servitude to the spirits of illness and death. But it shows again how moral and natural laws intermingle as soon as we come into the higher worlds. Such are the experiences that are undergone when one has come to the point described yesterday. And one has to go through these experiences in order that one may also experience other necessary conditions. We shall see later why necessary. And so may advance still further in regard to higher experiences. This matter of ascending into the higher worlds is not such that one can say, "Today you are beginning your ascent into the higher worlds, and then you will mount upward stage by stage." For one who wants to become an initiate, things go forward unnoticed in relation to external happenings, amid the affairs and events of ordinary life. We do indeed come stage by stage into the higher worlds, but from this sojourn in the higher worlds we must again come forth and live in the ordinary world. From the experiences in the spiritual worlds, however, we bring along something into the physical world. We realize after we have become initiates that while moving around in the physical world we are endowed with feelings and perceptions other than those pertaining to anyone who is not a seer. We need only train ourselves, and a correct schooling will see to this, not to be misled in ordinary life through the alteration of our perceptions and feelings. We must learn to be a seer only for the higher worlds, and not to bring into the ordinary world the characteristics and attitude of soul needed for the higher worlds. This must be strictly avoided. We should be able to be a seer while remaining as rational as anyone else in the ordinary physical world. Hence, the least suitable persons for the development of seership are those who from the outset are predisposed to be visionaries, enthusiasts and intellectual idealists, those who already experience in the physical world what has its justification in the spiritual world, people who in the physical world, quote, hear the grass grow, close quote, who see everywhere the visions of the dreamer, not the realities perceived by a sober disposition, people who indulge their imagination. There are many more such than is generally supposed. Such people are of no use for training in seership. Persons who stand with both feet on solid ground, who understand something of actuality and judge things as they are, these are the people best fitted for developing seership. This will have indicated how a person should not let feelings and perceptions necessary for the physical world be misled through what he acquires for the ascent into the higher worlds. Quite definite feelings and perceptions remain with us once we have become seers. In the physical world we will also be different people. But in order that this may do us no harm, we must also apply these new feelings and perceptions to things in the external physical world to which we had previously paid no attention or had not noticed. Then we will find, not in a bad sense, but emphatically in a good one, that our relations with nature are somewhat altered. For instance, we will feel differently toward the world of plants that spreads itself like a carpet over the earth. Formerly we looked at the plants and were delighted with their greenery, with the wealth of flowers and their colors, with everything that the plant world offered to us as it grows out of the earth and delights the eyes and perhaps the other senses. Let us not think in this connection of some dull, prosaic person, but of someone who can really enjoy to the full the effect that the beauty of the earth's plant covering can evoke in the soul. And let us not imagine that people who have become seers must forfeit in the very least any part of their feeling for the vesture of plants on the earth. Something else, however, arises within us. When we look at the plant world, we feel that a certain inner relationship links it with sun, moon, and stars. In our feeling and perception, the green carpet of plants grows together with what is out there in the cosmos. Nowadays, people build up plenty of abstract ideas on this subject. Everyone with a mere smattering of learning knows how the earth's carpet of plants is connected with the activity of the light from the sun, how the plants cannot grow without the specific action of the sun's rays. And people have some inkling that not only the sun's activity has an influence on the plant world, but that the rest of the starry world also has an influence. Certainly some people are incredulous about this, but not so long ago there lived a great and significant thinker who applied himself in a thoroughly scientific way to studying the influence of the moon on the weather, and so on, the vegetation of the earth. I refer to Gustav Theodor Fechner. Not from the standpoint of any superstition, but from that of quite empirical observation, he tried to show that the influence of the new moon on rainfall is different from that of the full moon, and so on. There were many people who wanted to prove their scientific outlook by laughing at Gustav Theodor Fechner and his studies of the moon. One of those who laughed loudest was the celebrated botanist Schleiden, who voiced his opinion that it certainly does not depend on the full moon or the new moon whether for 14 days we have more rain or less. Fechner replied, conditions then were somewhat more patriarchal than they are today, quote, "Let the matter be put to the test indirectly through the women. Learned men soon begin to quarrel." Close quote. Now, the two wives, Frau Professor Schleiden and Frau Professor Fechner, always put out tubs in their Leipzig backyards to catch rainwater for washing. Fechner proposed that Frau Professor Schleiden should put out her tubs at new moon, while his own wife put out hers at full moon, and they would soon see in which period the greater quantity of rain would fall. And behold, Frau Professor Schleiden was by no means in agreement with her husband, for she caught the smaller quantity of rainwater. Thus, ironically, one might say, a decision was reached, though we would not want to attach any value to it now. Later on, however, it will emerge that sunlight, the heat of the sun, and also the other stellar influences, all have effects on the plant world. At first, this is theoretical knowledge, but the clairvoyants have direct perception of how influences from the earth interact with those from stellar space. They regard them ultimately as one, and they feel as a vital occurrence the pouring out of the sunlight upon the vegetation of the earth, and again the withdrawal of the sunlight. They feel how it is with the plants when the sunlight is withdrawn from them. As one feels sympathy with the child that is very much attached to its mother when the mother is removed from its sight for a while, so does the seer feel sympathy when the sunlight is withdrawn from the plants. This sympathy with the plant world is an experience that comes to initiates, so that when they have reached the point spoken of in the preceding lecture, they acquired perceptions of such a kind that they become participants in the relations between earth growth and plant growth, and the sun and stars. Through the birth of this feeling, we are adapted for feeling something else besides. We can feel this something when we return into the physical world from the spiritual world and look, for instance, at a waking or sleeping person. Also, when we have, so to speak, laid aside our clairvoyant gift and see only the physical world and the sleeping person, then too the feeling comes that the sleeper has been forsaken by something. This is very similar to the feeling one has when, for example, in autumn, the relation of the sun's rays to the earth's vegetation changes in the usual way. Quite similar are the feelings toward nature, now forsaken by sun and stars, to the feelings toward the human organism, forsaken by its ego and astral body. Now, one has the specific experience that in this respect we are independent of our relation to the physical heavens, whereas the growth of plants is dependent on this relationship. Concerning the plants, we know that they cannot go to sleep as they like. Owing to their inner constitution, they must wait until the sun sets in the evening, or until autumn comes. Concerning humans, we know that in our time, and especially under our conditions of civilization, we are no longer in the least guided by the sun. For instance, if we had to guide ourselves by the sun as do the plants, we could not be assembled here together. The transition, which for the plants is so strictly ruled by the course of the sun and stars, has no influence on us. Certainly, if we come into primitive rural conditions and see how not only the fowls but also the village folk go to sleep at a certain time and wake at a certain time, we feel as if there were something of a plant-like connection between human beings and the course of the sun and stars. But we have to conclude that in the course of evolution, humans have emancipated themselves from the cosmic course of events. With our physical and etheric bodies, we are able to come into the situation which the plant comes to through the position of the sun and stars. We come to it through inner conditions. I will not say by dint of inner free will. We can have our afternoon nap through our own inner condition. That is, we can come out of our physical and etheric bodies. The plant cannot have an afternoon sleep at will. It has to regulate itself entirely in accordance with the course of the stars. But what are we when, as physical and etheric bodies, we lie asleep, with our astral bodies and our egos outside? Our physical and etheric bodies then have the value of the plant. A physical and an etheric body are what the plant has. Considering all this, you may say, a plant grows gradually into connection with the sun and the starry world, becomes one with them. Hence we must direct our feeling from the plant to the world of the stars and sun. This same direction of feeling applies to the sleeping man, who also consists of physical body and etheric body, and has the value of a plant in relation to his ego and astral body. for these, quite independently of the sun's position, are outside his physical and etheric bodies when he sleeps, just as the physical sun is outside the physical body and etheric body of the plant. What I have here explained to you is experienced by the seer. Now, when, proceeding from such perceptions, we deliberately bring about the independence of the ego and astral body from the etheric and physical bodies, when we have got so far as deliberately to make the physical body and the etheric body into a kind of plant by passing out of them, then we come to know something very strange. It is as if the sun were speaking, as if it were looking down on the plants and observing itself in relation to them, and then saying, yes, this physical and this etheric body of the plants belong to me, for they need what I can send them. Exactly as the sun might speak to the plant growing below, so can the ego of a person say of his physical and etheric bodies, quote, they belong to me as the plant does to the sun. I am like a sun to the physical and etheric bodies, close quote. A sun to the physical and etheric bodies. So do we learn of necessity to speak of our ego. And just as we learn to speak of our ego with reference to our physical and etheric bodies, as the sun would speak to the plant, so do we learn to speak of our astral body as the moon, and also the planets, would have to speak to the plant. That is a quite special and important experience in the mysteries. It was cultivated as a real and immediate experience, first in the mysteries of Zarathustra, and then wherever the world was developing, right on to the mysteries of the Holy Grail. This experience was always called, quote, seeing the sun at midnight, close quote, because we had it most clearly, especially at the time of the Egyptian mysteries, when in sleep we saw the sun spiritually at midnight and felt ourselves united with the forces of the sun in the manner described. It was an experiencing of the solar element in our own ego, as a solar force that shines upon the physical and etheric bodies. This then was a third experience, common to all the different mysteries. Common to them all were and are the, quote, pressing forward to the boundaries of death, the experiencing of the elementary world, and now seeing the sun at midnight, close quote. But it must be clearly understood that at the moment when the seer feels himself isolated and as though sun-like or star-like in relation to his own etheric and physical bodies, he no longer feels the sun and stars only in their physical substantiality, but becomes acquainted with the spiritual beings and worlds belonging to them. The experiencing of the cosmos is an experience in the spiritual worlds. We have to be quite clear about that. Now, in order to rise up correctly into the higher worlds, and to have the experiences which correspond with the spiritual realities, it is important and necessary that we should first gain acquaintance with the quite different nature of the spiritual world as compared with the physical world. One learns enough of this when, as a seer, we can test and observe the consequences of indolence or of a lack of conscience for the experience of the soul in the time between death and a new birth, and much else besides. Through these things, clairvoyants must, so to speak, open out their souls for conditions essentially different from those on the physical plane. Only then are they ripe for gaining living experience of the spiritual cosmos, for recognizing the interconnection of the ego and the astral body with the cosmos. One comes directly to the experience that humans, in regard to the highest members of their being, belong not only to the earth but are at home in the whole cosmos. Then all previous theorizing is seen as a mere playing with words. We know then that every person, when we pass out of our physical and etheric bodies on going to sleep in the evening, enters into participation with cosmic forces. We seek strengths for ourselves out of the whole universe, and on reawaking, bring back the forces we have gathered during sleep in order to use them in the physical world. The connection with the cosmos is experienced at a quite definite stage of the mysteries. From this stage, we will proceed tomorrow. The end of Lecture 2. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these lectures at rudolfsteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, steinerbooks.org in America and rudolfsteinerpress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. This is a reading of Collected Works, Volume 144 by Rudolf Steiner, The Mysteries of Initiation, From Isis to the Holy Grail. 4 lectures, translated by Charles Davy. This is Lecture 3, given in Berlin on the 5th of February, 1913. When we of our time undergo an occult training, which leads us to such experiences as were described in the last 2 lectures, we enter by means of this training into the spiritual worlds, and there we experience certain facts and meet with certain beings. The phrase, quote, to see the sun at midnight, close quote, is fundamentally only an expression for spiritual facts and for the meeting with spiritual beings who are connected with solar existence. But when we ascend into the higher worlds, we undergo certain experiences which one cannot describe otherwise than by saying we experience much that is significant in the higher worlds through such an ascent, but we also feel forsaken and alone. We feel that we can gather up our experience in some such words as these, quote, much, very much you are seeing here, but the very thing you must long for above all else, after all you have gone through, that you are not able to experience, close quote. And we would like to question all the beings whom we meet after such an ascent concerning certain secrets we long to understand. That is the feeling we have. But all these beings who unveil much that is immense and powerful remain silent when we want to learn from them about those mysteries that we must now regard as the most important of all. Hence, individuals in our time, when they have mounted thus to the higher worlds, feel it to be, above all, painful that in spite of all the splendor, in spite of their meeting with those glorious beings, they have an immense emptiness in their inner life. And if nothing else were to happen, a protracted experience of this loneliness, this forlorn condition in the higher worlds, would finally bring about something like despair in our souls. Now at this point something can happen, and usually does happen, if the ascent has been undertaken according to the true rules of initiation, which may be a protection from this despair at first, though not permanently. Something like a remembrance may arise in the soul, or one might say a retrospect into far-off times of the past, a kind of reading in the Akashic record about long-past happenings. And what is then experienced, one cannot characterize these things except by trying to clothe them in approximate words, might be put in the following way. When as a modern individual you ascend into these higher worlds, you are met by forlornness, despair. But pictures call up for you long past happenings, showing you that in distant times humans ascended into the worlds into which you now wish to rise. Yes, from these pictures in memory, you may well come to recognize that in earlier incarnations your own soul took part in what these humans experienced when formerly they rose into the higher worlds. It might even appear that the soul of a present-day individual, in contemplating these pictures, looks at experiences of his own, passed through in times long since past. Then, in those remote ages, this soul would have been an initiate. In other cases, we would know only that our souls had been connected in times long past with those who, as initiates, had then risen into the higher worlds. But our soul now feels lonely and forsaken, whereas those once initiated souls did not feel lonely and forsaken in the same worlds, but experienced innermost bliss. We will recognize further that this was so because in those ancient times souls were differently constituted, and for this reason they experienced differently what they beheld in the higher worlds. What is it then that is really experienced? The experience now in question is such that it brings before the soul beings of higher worlds, who are working upon the sensory world from the supra-sensible realms. Beings are perceived, who stand behind our sensory world. Conditions are seen, such as were described yesterday. But if one tries to summarize all one sees, it can be characterized in some such way as the following. We feel ourselves to be in the higher worlds, and gazing down, as it were, into the sensory world, we feel ourselves united in some way with spirits who have passed through the portal of death, and with them too we gaze downward and see how they will again employ their forces in order to enter physical existence. We look down and see how forces are sent out of the supra-sensible worlds in order to bring about the processes of the different kingdoms of nature in the sensory world. We see the whole current of events which are prepared for our world out of the higher worlds, because in the course of a sojourn of this kind in the higher worlds, we are outside our physical and etheric bodies. We look down upon them, and we see also those forces in the cosmos, in the whole spiritual universe, which are working on our physical and etheric bodies. And through the activity of the beings into whose company we have entered, we learn to understand how physical and etheric bodies come into existence within the physical world. We learn to understand this thoroughly. We come to understand how certain beings who are associated with the sun send their activity into the earth and work on engendering the human physical and etheric bodies. We learn also to know certain beings associated with the existence of the moon, who work down out of the cosmos in order likewise to cooperate in bringing about the physical and etheric bodies of human beings. Then, however, arises a great longing, a longing that becomes terrible for someone of the present time. It is the longing to know something of how the astral body and the ego are born out of the cosmos, how they come into existence. Whereas the seer can discern exactly how the physical body and the etheric body arise out of the forces of the cosmos, completely hidden from him is everything that could point to how the human astral body and the ego are brought into being. In deepest darkness and secrecy is veiled everything that has to do with the astral body and ego. Thus the feeling grows. What you are in your inmost nature, what you yourself really are, is veiled from your spiritual sight. And that in which you sheathe yourself when you are living in the physical world is disclosed to you precisely enough. All this is experienced by us in the present time, when we rise to higher worlds in the manner described. It was experienced also by those who in primordial times undertook the ascent. But they did not feel the great longing we have spoken of. They had no need to behold their innermost being, for they were so constituted that they felt a deep inward satisfaction in perceiving how the spiritual beings whose company they had reached were at work in building physical and etheric bodies on the earth. In contemplating how these beings worked down from the sun to accomplish this task, the souls who were initiated in past times found their highest satisfaction. It must be added that the work performed by these beings presented itself under a different aspect in those times, hence the satisfaction it could afford. In our time, the work appears in such a light that one asks, wherefore all this preparation of the physical and etheric bodies, if one cannot understand what these sheaths conceal? That is the difference between a person of the present time and someone of old. And the period in the past which was connected particularly with these experiences is that in which Zarathustra initiated his pupils and guided them up into the higher worlds. If aspirants were to be led up into the higher worlds in the same way today as they were by Zarathustra, they would feel the emptiness and loneliness to which reference has been made. In the time of Zarathustra, those who were to be initiated experienced the working of Ahura Mazda on the physical body and the etheric body. And in the unveiling of this wonderful mystery, they felt bliss and satisfaction. For they were so disposed that they felt inwardly stirred when they saw how the sheaths, which we need if we are to accomplish our earthly mission, are brought into existence. In this way they found satisfaction. Thus it was with the Zarathustrian initiation. For the initiates could, quote, see the sun at midnight, close quote. That is, they were not looking upon the physical form of the sun, but upon the spiritual beings who are linked with the sun. They saw emanating from the sun the forces that play into the physical body. They saw how the forces which the sun is able to send forth mold the human head and form the different parts of the human brain. For it would be folly for anyone to think that a marvelous construction, such as the human brain, could come into existence merely through terrestrial forces. Solar forces must work into it. These forces bring together the complex involutions of the human brain, poised above the face. Engaged in this task are quite numerous beings. Zarathustra gave them the name of Amshaspans. They furnish the stimulus for the forces of the cosmos, which make possible the building of the human brain and the upper nerves of the spinal cord, with the exception of the lower 28 pairs of nerves. Then Zarathustra also pointed out how other currents flow from beings who are linked with the life of the moon. He showed how wonderfully the structure of the cosmos is adapted, so that from 28 groups of entities, IZs, as they are called, currents proceed which build up the spinal cord with its 28 lower pairs of nerve fibers. Thus our physical and etheric bodies formed out of currents which stream forth from cosmic beings. They were powerful impressions that the initiates of Zarathustra received in this way. And in receiving them as an expression of the work of Ahura Mazda, they felt an inner bliss concerning all that is thus accomplished in the world. If we moderns were to raise ourselves in the same way into the higher worlds, we would of course also be capable of wonderment. We too would be able to begin to experience the same bliss, but gradually we would pass on to the feeling that one cannot clothe in words other than these. Quote, what is the purpose of it all? I know nothing about that being who passes from incarnation to incarnation. I know solely about those beings who build up sheaths in each new incarnation out of the cosmos, but they build only sheaths. Close quote. That was precisely the essence of the Zarathustra initiation, its revelation of the connection between the earthly part of us and the life of the sun. It was characteristic of the time of Zarathustra that we were able to absorb into our occult knowledge those mysteries we have now described. Again, it was in a different way that souls in ancient Egypt entered the higher worlds at initiation. Souls, for example, who went through the Hermes initiation. We have already spoken about all these things, but in these lectures they will be presented in rather more detail than was possible previously. When in ancient Egyptian times souls were raised into the higher worlds through the Hermes initiation, then, as it must always be after initiation, they felt themselves to be outside their physical and etheric bodies, and knew that they were now within a world of spiritual facts and spiritual beings. The circuit of vision through which these souls were then led was wide. They were shown the individual beings and facts, as can happen also with the soul of today. But one must not think of it as though they went about on physical feet. It was their vision that was guided, as if a person's sight were to be led all round a region as wide as the universe. Thus it was in this initiation. Then came a moment of experience wherein the initiates felt as though a traveler in a country encircled by the sea had reached the shore. They knew they had come to the farthest point attainable. In the Egyptian initiation, they experienced what one cannot clothe in other words than these. Quote, "In your vision you have been led far and wide through cosmic realms and have come to know the beings and forces that work on your physical body and your etheric body. But now you are entering the most holy place. You are entering a region where you can feel yourself united with the being who works with others on the part of you that goes from one incarnation to another and on your astral body." Close quote. It is a significant experience that occurs at this point, for after it, all things become, in some sense, different. For the initiates, after that, one possibility is closed. In the world they have now entered, on the shores of cosmic existence, they are no longer able to make use of their former ways of thinking and judging. If they cannot cast off all this earthly physical power of judgment, if they cannot discard what has guided them so far, then they cannot have this experience on the borders of existence. They cannot feel themselves united with that being who is active when human beings as spirit and soul approaches their birth into a new incarnation and seek nation, family, and parents in order to clothe themselves with new sheaths. All the beings whom they have already come to know, and who make it clear to them how the etheric and physical sheaths arise and are formed out of the cosmos, are unable to explain what kind of forces are working in that being with whom they now feel themselves united, and who is building and weaving in the innermost astral being of humans themselves. It becomes quite apparent to the seer, as it was to the Egyptian soul, who was going through the Hermes initiation, that now, after the soul is outside its sheaths and has passed through the, quote, cosmic existence, close quote, already alluded to, it feels itself united with the being. The soul can feel the qualities of this being, only it feels itself as if it were within these qualities and not outside this being. And it can know that this being is really there, but that it is at the same time within this being. The first impression that the aspirant receives of this being is such that one says to oneself, "In this being lie the forces which bring the soul from one incarnation to another, and also the forces which illuminate the soul between death and a new birth. All that is there within." But when there surges toward you a force like unto spiritual cosmic warmth, one that conveys the soul from death to a new birth, and when there presses toward you the spiritual light that illumines souls between death and a new birth, and when you feel how this warmth and this light stream out from the being with whom you are united, you are now in a quite peculiar situation. You have had to drink the waters of Lethe, to forget the art of understanding that formerly guided you through the physical world, to lay aside your former power of judgment, your intellectuality, for here these would only lead you astray. And as yet you have gained nothing of a new kind. In your experience of the cosmic warmth, which brings the soul to a new birth, you are within the ocean of forces which illuminate the soul between death and a new birth. You experience the force and the light that issue from this being. You behold this being in such a manner that you can do nothing but ask of it, "Who are you?" For you alone can tell me who you are, and only then can I know that which takes the essential inward part of me as a human being from death to a new birth. Only when you tell me this can I know what my innermost nature is as a human being. Close quote. And the being with whom the aspirant knows himself to be united remains mute. He feels with the deepest part of himself that he is united with the deepest part of the being. The urge toward self-knowledge arises, to know what a human being is. And yet the being remains silent. Aspirants must first have stood for a while before this silent being, and have felt deeply the longing to have the riddle of the universe solved in a new manner, as it never can be on the physical earth. They must have brought into this world, to this being, as a force out of himself, the deep longing to have the riddle of the universe solved in a way foreign to physical existence, and the soul must entirely live in the longing to have the cosmic enigma solved in this manner. Then, when they have felt themselves united with the mute spiritual being, and have lived within it with longing for the solution that we have indicated, then they feel that there streams forth into this spiritual being with whom they are united the force of their own longing. And because this force of the aspirant's own longing for the solution of the riddle streams out into the spiritual being, after a time it gives birth to something like another being projected from it. But what is born is not after the manner of an earthly birth, as the aspirants know at once through their own vision. An earthly birth arises, in quotes, in time. It enters into the stream of time. But concerning the birth from this being, the aspirant knows it is born from this being. It has been born from this being since primordial times, always. And this birth continues from primordial ages up to the present. Only this natal process of one being from another has hitherto not been visible to us. Until now it has been withheld from our sight. This natal process consists in this. It is really continuous, but we, owing to our having prepared ourselves by means of our yearning for the solving of the riddle, now see it. It is now perceived in the spiritual world. The aspirants know this. Thus they do not say, "Now a being is born," but rather, "From the being with whom you have united yourselves, ever since primordial times, a being has always been born. But now the process of the being's birth and the being itself who is born are perceptible to you." What I have now pictured to you, as far as it can be done in the words of our language, is that to which the Hermes initiators led their pupils. And the feelings that I have just described, I might say with stammering words, for the things contain so much that the words of our tongue can express only in a stammering way. These feelings were the experiences of the so-called Egyptian Isis initiation. When the aspirants who were going through the Isis initiation had reached the farthest shore of existence, and had gazed upon the beings who build up the physical body and the etheric body, when they stood before the silent goddess, from whom warmth and light come forth for the innermost of the human soul, they said to themselves, quote, "That is Isis, that is the mute and silent goddess, whose countenance can be unveiled to none who see only with mortal eyes, but only to those who have worked themselves through to the shores which have been described, so that they can see with those eyes which go from incarnation to incarnation, and are no longer mortal. For an impenetrable veil hides the form of Isis from mortal eyes." Close quote. When the aspirants had thus gazed upon Isis, and had experienced in their souls the feeling described, they understood what has been described as, in quotes, the birth. What was this birth? They understood that it can be designated as, quote, the resounding through all space of the music of the spheres, close quote, and as the merging of the tones of this music of the spheres with the creative cosmic word, the word that permeates space and pours into the beings everything that has to be so poured into them, as the soul has to be poured into the physical and etheric bodies, after passing through the life between death and a new birth. Everything that has to be thus poured out from the spiritual world into the physical world, so that what is poured out acquires the inward character of soul, is poured in from the harmony of the spheres, resounding through space. The harmony of the spheres gradually assumes such a form that through the inner significance it expresses, it can be understood as the cosmic word, the word which ensouls the beings that are vitalized by the forces of warmth and light that pour into those bodies arising from the divine forces and beings perceived with the vision already attained. Thus did the aspirants look into the world of the harmony of the spheres, the world of the cosmic word. Thus did they look into the world that is the veritable home of the human soul during the time between death and a new birth. What is hidden deep in human physical earthly existence, but lives within death and a new birth, is the splendor of the light and warmth, what deeply veils itself in the physical world, as the world of the harmony of the spheres and the cosmic word, was experienced in the Hermes initiation as coming to birth from Isis. There Isis stands before the aspirant, Isis herself on the one side, and on the other side the being she has borne, of whom one must speak as cosmic tones and the cosmic word. The aspirants feel themselves in the company of Isis and of the cosmic word born of her. This cosmic word is, in the first place, the appearing of Osiris. Quote, Isis in association with Osiris, close quote. Thus do they appear before direct vision. For in the very oldest Egyptian initiation it was said that Osiris was at the same time spouse and son of Isis. And in the older Egyptian initiation, the essential thing was that the aspirants, through this initiation, experienced the mysteries of the life of soul, which remains united with us during the period between death and a new birth. Through the union with Osiris, it was possible to recognize ourselves in our deeper significance as human. So it was brought to pass that the Egyptian initiates met the cosmic word and the cosmic tones as the elucidators of their own being in the spiritual world. But that was only up to a certain point of time in the ancient Egyptian period. After that it ceased. There was a great difference. This is shown also by the Akashic records when one looks back into ancient times, between the experiences of the Egyptian initiates in the ancient Egyptian temples and what they experienced later on. Let us bring before our souls what the initiates experienced in these later times. They could still be led through the vast spaces of the universe to the confines of existence. There they could meet with all the beings who build up the human physical and etheric bodies. There they could approach the shores of being and could have the vision of the mute, silent Isis. There they could apprehend in her the cosmic warmth which contains the forces that lead from death to a new birth. There they could also become acquainted with the light which illumines the soul between death and a new birth. And the longing arose to hear the cosmic word and the cosmic harmony. Longing lived in their souls when it united itself with the silent Isis. But the goddess remained mute. In that later age, no Osiris could be born, no cosmic harmony resounded, no cosmic word expounded, but now showed itself only as cosmic warmth and cosmic light. And the soul of the aspirant could not have expressed these experiences otherwise than by saying something like the following, quote, Thus, O goddess, do I look up in grief to you, tormented by the thirst for knowledge, the yearning for knowledge. And you remain silent and speechless toward the tormented and sorrow-laden soul. And this soul, because it cannot understand itself, seems to itself as though extinguished, as if it must lose its very existence. Close quote. And through her mourning countenance, the goddess expressed her powerlessness to bring forth the cosmic word and the cosmic harmony. The aspirants saw in her that she had been deprived of the power to bring forth Osiris and to have him at her side, Osiris as son and spouse. They felt that Osiris had been torn from Isis. Those who went through this initiation and came back into the physical world had a serious but resigned worldview. They knew her, the holy Isis, but they felt themselves to be, quote, children of the widow, close quote. The point of time between the old initiation, wherein one was able to experience the birth of Osiris in those ancient Egyptian mysteries, and that wherein one met only the mute, mourning Isis, and could become a child of the widow in the Egyptian mysteries, the point of time which separates these two phases of the Egyptian initiation, when was it? It was the time in which Moses lived. For the karma of Egypt was fulfilled in such a way that not only was Moses initiated into the mysteries of Egypt, but he took them with him. When he led his people out of Egypt, he took with him the part of the Egyptian initiation which added the initiation of Osiris to the mourning Isis as she later became. Such was the transition from the Egyptian civilization to that of the Tanakh, or Old Testament. Truly, Moses had carried away the secret of Osiris, the secret of the cosmic word. And if he had not left behind the powerless Isis, there could not have resounded for him, in the way that he had to understand it for the sake of his people, that great significant saying, quote, I am the I am, close quote, Ege Asher Ege. So was the Egyptian mystery carried over to the ancient Hebrew mystery. We have tried now to show, using such words as are available for these matters, what the experiences were like in the mysteries of Zarathustra and of Egypt. These things do not lend themselves to intellectual presentation. The essential point is that the soul goes through experiences corresponding to what I have endeavored to describe. And it is important to enter into what took place in the soul of the aspirants in the later Egyptian initiation, to feel how they raised their souls into the higher worlds and met Isis with mourning looks and sorrow-stricken countenances, the result of her having to view the human soul, which was well able to yearn and thirst for knowledge of the spiritual worlds, but could not be satisfied. Certain Greek initiates also experienced the same being of whom the Egyptians spoke as the later Isis. Hence the seriousness of the Greek initiation, where it appears in its solemnity. What had been experienced in earlier times in the supra-sensible worlds, what gave significance to those supra-sensible worlds, in that they resounded to the cosmic word and cosmic tone, was no longer there. It was there no more. The supra-sensible worlds were as though desolate and forsaken by the cosmic word, those worlds into which in earlier initiations aspirants had been able to enter. The Zarathustrian initiates could still feel satisfied when in these worlds they encountered the beings already described, for they felt themselves fulfilled by the cosmic light, which they perceived as Ahura Mazda. They perceived it as masculine, of solar nature. The Egyptians perceived it as feminine, lunar. At a higher stage in the Zarathustrian initiation, they perceived also the cosmic word, not so concretely as if born from such a being as Isis, but they experienced it, and they knew the harmony of the spheres in the cosmic word. In the later Egyptian time, and also in other lands during this late Egyptian time, when aspirants raised themselves into the higher worlds, their feelings were quite similar to those of present-day individuals, as described at the beginning of the present lecture. They rise up into the higher worlds, become acquainted with all the beings who cooperate in building up the physical and etheric bodies. But they feel themselves forsaken and alone if nothing else appears, because they have something in themselves that longs for the cosmic word and the cosmic harmony. And the cosmic word and the cosmic harmony cannot resound for them. Today such individuals feel lonely and forsaken. In the later Egyptian age, they did not only feel forsaken and desolate, but if they were true children of the widow, and were out of the physical and etheric bodies and in the spiritual worlds, they felt themselves as human souls in such a way that they were constrained to clothe their feelings in the words, "The God is preparing to leave the worlds which you have always trodden when you felt the cosmic word. The God has ceased to be active there." And ever more and more did this feeling condense itself into what one may call the suprasensible equivalent of what we encounter in the sensory world as human death. When we see someone die, when one knows that they are passing out of the physical world. Now, when the initiates of the later Egyptian age rose up into the higher worlds, They were partakers in the gradual dying of the god. As one feels with a person when he is passing into the spiritual world, so did the initiate of the later Egyptian period feel how the god took leave of the spiritual world in order to pass over into another world. This was the significant and remarkable part of the later Egyptian initiation. That when the aspirant raised his life into the spiritual worlds, it was not into rapture and bliss, but in order to partake in the gradual passing away of a God who was present in these higher worlds as cosmic word and cosmic harmony. Out of this frame of mind there gradually condensed the myth of Osiris, who was torn away from Isis and conveyed to Asia, and for whom Isis mourned. With this lecture we have placed ourselves on one bank of the stream, which separates the evolution of humanity into two parts. We have come from the direction of this evolution as far as the bank. We stand upon it. And what this standing signifies has been brought home to us through the frame of mind of the later Egyptian initiate, the child of the widow, who was initiated in order to experience mourning and resignation. It will now be our task in the boat of anthroposophy to cross the stream that separates the two shores of human evolution. In the last lecture we shall see what is on the other shore, when we push off our boat from the place where we have experienced the mourning for the God who is dying in the heavens, when we leave that place in order to traverse the stream and arrive at the other bank. When the boat of anthroposophy has carried us across, with the remembrance that we have previously experienced the dying of a God in the heavens, we shall see what presents itself to our view on the other side. The end of Lecture 3. You are listening to RudolfSteinerAudio.com. As well, you can hear these podcasts at RudolfSteiner.podbean.com. Please consider becoming a patron. As well, there are two publishing houses, SteinerBooks.org in America and RudolfSteinerPress.com in England, which are the sole publishers of Steiner into English and have given me permission to do these recordings. Please consider patronizing them as well. This is a reading of a small cycle of lectures by Rudolf Steiner, Collected Works, Volume 144. 4 lectures. I am on the last one. It's entitled The book is entitled The Mysteries of Initiation, From Isis to the Holy Grail, translated by Charles Davy, and this is the last lecture. Lecture 4, given in Berlin on the 7th of February, 1913. In the last lecture, we spoke of the experiences of a human soul in relation to the principles of the mysteries of ancient times, the Eastern and Egyptian mysteries. In a certain sense, this brought us to the last step in the stages of initiation. For in the first lecture, we described as characteristic of the nature of all mysteries these 4 steps: approach to the boundary of death, becoming acquainted with the life of the elementary world, beholding the sun at midnight, standing before the upper and lower gods. This standing before the upper and lower gods comes about when the aspirant has to apprehend the forces which rule everything that belongs to the human physical, the part which remains behind in sleep as physical and etheric bodies. Here we have to do with the lower gods in the widest sense of the word. We have to speak of the upper gods in relation to all the forces that are concerned with our innermost being, with what passes through various incarnations, the ego and the astral body. In the preceding lecture, I was able to describe the experiences of modern individuals acquainted with the nature of the mysteries, when they look back in the Akashic record at the experiences undergone by human souls within the mysteries of ancient times. We had to point to the tragic impression made on Egyptian souls when, in the course of their initiation, they came face to face with the changes that had affected the cosmic power known as Isis in the Egyptian mysteries. From the Osiris legend, we learn that the spouse of Isis was overcome by the enemy and torn away from her. But we have also come to know the results in the higher worlds of this changed situation in the life of Isis. The soul that in later Egyptian times had raised itself into spiritual worlds became a participant in the fate of Osiris, the god who was dying to the higher worlds and descending into the earthly region, for that is how it was experienced. It is extraordinarily difficult to speak in ideas and concepts concerning the further development of this, in quotes, fate of gods. But since we have become accustomed to import pictures as a help in connection with the most intimate things of the higher worlds, where our ordinary speech, which has already become so secular, fails us, let us express in a readily understandable picture something that is to form, as it were, the leitmotif of the exposition to be given today. Let us enter into the tragic mood of those about to be initiated during the Egyptian epoch. We transpose ourselves into this mood and find that it originated from experiences that aspirants could express only by saying to themselves, quote, "Formerly, when I entered the spiritual worlds, I found Osiris permeating cosmic space with the creative word and its meaning, which represent the fundamental forces of all being and development. Now, the word has become mute and silent. The god who was called Osiris has forsaken these realms. He is preparing to penetrate into other regions. He has descended into the region of the earth in order to enter into the souls of human beings." Close quote. The being who had been known spiritually to human souls in earlier days first became manifest in physical life when Moses heard in the physical world the voice that in earlier ages had been heard only in the spiritual worlds, quote, "Ege Asher Ege," close quote. I am the I am who was and is and will be. Then this being, who as the creative word had gradually become lost to the experience of the candidate for initiation, transferred his life into the region of the earth so that he could gradually come to life again in the souls of earthly humans. And in this new life, rising to ever higher and higher glory, would consist the further development of the earth, even to the end of the evolution. Let us try to transport ourselves as vividly as we can into the frame of mind of these aspirants, and realize how in the spiritual regions to which they could first attain, they felt the creative word disappearing, sinking down into the region of the earth, and becoming lost to spiritual sight. Let us follow the evolution of the earth, and we shall see that for spiritual sight, this creative word now goes forward somewhat as a stream that has been on the surface and then disappears for a certain time below the earth's surface in order to reappear later at another place. And so there reappeared what the souls who were being initiated in the later Egyptian mysteries had seen sinking tragically out of sight. It reappeared, and could be looked upon by those in later times who were permitted to participate in the mysteries. They had to bring into the picture what they could see arising again, but arising now in such a way that henceforward it belonged to the evolution of the earth. How did what had become submerged in ancient Egypt reappear? It reappeared in such a way that it became visible in the holy vessel that is spoken of as the Holy Grail, guarded by the Knights of the Holy Grail. In the rise of the Holy Grail can be found what had sunk down in ancient Egypt, and in this arising of the Holy Grail there stands before us everything that went into the post-Christian renewal of the principle of the ancient mysteries. Fundamentally speaking, the phrase, the Holy Grail, with all that belongs to it, involves a reappearance of the essence of the Eastern mysteries. Everything that appears at a certain time in the evolution of humanity, in order to bring this evolution forward, must include a kind of repetition of what has gone before. In every later epoch, the earlier experiences of humanity must appear again, but in a fresh form. We know that in the third post-Atlantean epoch, the emphasis was on the sentient soul. In the fourth, the Greco-Latin epoch, it was on the intellectual soul. And the development of the consciousness soul is the special task of our own epoch, the fifth. For the candidate for initiation, all these things are important, because in a given epoch, the most important forces of initiation must proceed from the psychic member that is specially connected with that epoch. Thus the Egyptian initiation was connected with the sentient soul, the Greco-Latin initiation with the intellectual soul, and the initiation of the fifth post-Atlantean culture epoch must be connected with the consciousness soul. But at the dawn of this fifth epoch, there must also be a repetition of what the initiates once underwent out of the forces of the sentient soul, and equally a repetition of what was undergone in the fourth post-Atlantean epoch. Then something is added, something new, that must come from the consciousness soul to provide supporting forces for the candidate. Hence the fifth post-Atlantean epoch, with its special emphasis on the arising of the new initiation, must have centers where there can be recalled to human souls the secrets poured into human evolution through the Egypto-Chaldean soul, and the secrets poured out in the fourth post-Atlantean epoch, the Greco-Latin time, during which the mystery of Golgotha took place. And to that must be added a new element. As in earlier ages, so also in this later age, that which was enacted in the depths of the mysteries finds expression in the most varied legends, and these correspond more or less closely to secrets in which the human soul has participated. Hence it was necessary that the secrets of the Egypto-Chaldean period should appear as a kind of repetition before the souls of the fifth epoch. They were secrets related to the cosmos, to the inpouring of the forces of the zodiac and of the planets, but particularly to the secrets connected with the cooperation of the sun and moon, and to the shifting influences of the sun and moon as they pass through the signs of the zodiac. I am speaking of the apparent movements because they sufficiently characterize the processes involved. But there had to be a difference between the way in which these secrets had emerged in the third epoch and the way in which they were presented in the fifth epoch. Everything now had to work right into the consciousness soul, into that which makes for and constitutes human personality. This took place in a quite special way, through the fact that those inspiring forces that were seen when, in the third epoch, souls were transported into spiritual regions of the cosmos, and which simultaneously streamed out of cosmic space into the earth. During the fifth epoch, these forces inspired certain individuals. In the dawn of the fifth epoch, accordingly, there were persons who, not exactly through their training, but through certain mysterious processes, became the instruments, the vehicles of cosmic influences issuing from the sun and moon during their passage through the signs of the zodiac. The secrets that could then be won for the human soul through these individuals were a repetition of what had once been experienced through the sentient soul. And the persons who expressed the transit of the cosmic forces through the signs of the zodiac were called, quote, the Knights of King Arthur's Round Table, close quote. 12 in number. They had around them a band of other men, but they were the principal knights. The others represented the starry host, into whom flowed the inspirations which were more distantly distributed in cosmic space, and into the 12 knights flowed the inspirations from the 12 directions of the zodiac. The inspirations which came from the spiritual forces of the sun and moon were represented by King Arthur and his wife Guinevere. Thus in King Arthur's Round Table we have the humanized cosmos. What we may call the exalted pedagogical school for the sentient soul of the West proceeded from King Arthur's Round Table. Hence, we are told, and the legend here refers in pictures of external facts to inner mysteries that were taking place at the dawn of that epoch in the human soul, how the knights of King Arthur's Round Table journeyed far and wide and slew monsters and giants. These external pictures point to the endeavors of human souls, who were to make progress in refining and purifying those forces of the astral body, which express themselves for the seer in pictures of monsters, giants, and the like. Everything that the sentient soul was to experience through the later mysteries is bound up with the pictorial concepts of King Arthur's Round Table. What the intellectuals were to experience in this later time has in turn found legendary form in the saga of the Holy Grail. Everything that had to be recapitulated from the epoch in which the mystery of Golgotha took place was concentrated in the influences that streamed forth from the secrets of the Holy Grail. And these influences could work on the intellectual soul in persons who had gained understanding of the Holy Grail and wished to understand their own epoch. In the present day also, the human soul must be open to these influences if it is to be initiated, if it is to have understanding for the spiritual nature of our times. The Holy Grail is surrounded by many, many mysteries. Today, naturally, we can give only a sketchy outline of these mysteries, but it may provide a starting point for more detailed studies that may one day be undertaken regarding these mysteries of the Holy Grail. In the Holy Grail, if understood in its true nature, there was embraced everything which characterized the secrets of the human soul in later times. Let us take the initiates of later times, when, having freed their ego and astral body from their physical and etheric bodies and come forth from them, they looked down at them from outside, and let us picture what they saw in them. They saw something that could be very disturbing, if they had not learned to understand it thoroughly. And they still see it today. The physical and etheric bodies have woven into them something that flows through them like streams or strands running in various directions. As the nerve fibers run through the physical body, so is there woven into the physical body something finer than the nerves, which clairvoyance reveals is dead, so dead that there really is something like a piece of dead substance in the human body. It is now condemned to be dead throughout the time between birth and death. But during the Eastern period of human evolution, it was still living. Yes, one has the experience that in human bodies there is something dead which once was alive, and one sets out to discover what it really is. Dead, in quotes, is to be understood here in a relative sense. The dead part is indeed stimulated by its environment, but there are tendencies and currents in the human body which, in comparison with the life that animates it, have always a disposition toward death. We investigate how this has come about, and we find that the origin of it is as follows. Once in ancient times, human souls possessed a certain faculty of clairvoyance, and in the latter part of the Egypto-Chaldean civilization, this clairvoyance still existed to such a degree that when we gazed into the starry heavens, we saw not merely the physical stars, but also the spiritual beings united with them. And so, when in the intermediate state between waking and sleeping, the human soul looked out into the universe and saw something spiritual, the impression received was different from the impressions made upon the human soul today, when people study science in the modern way, or are living mostly in the ordinary consciousness of the times. But all the souls living and embodied today were also incarnated in the Egypto-Chaldean epoch. All the souls present here today once looked out from their bodies into starry space, took part in the spiritual life of the universe, and received its impressions. This sank into our souls and became an intrinsic part of them. All the souls of today once looked out into the universe and received spiritual impressions in the same way as they now receive impressions of colors and sounds. It is all there still, in the depth of our souls, and the souls created their bodies in accordance with it. But our souls have lost remembrance of it. For modern consciousness, it is no longer present in human souls, and that which corresponds to the old catabolic forces which the souls used to receive cannot now build upon the body, with the result that the corresponding part of the physical and etheric bodies remains lifeless. If nothing else were to intervene, if we went on living merely with those sciences which are concerned with the outer physical world, then we would deteriorate more and more, because our souls have forgotten those former impressions of the spiritual world, which go with the vivifying and building up of the physical and etheric bodies. That is what the candidate for initiation sees today. And he can say to himself, souls are thirsting to vitalize something in the physical and etheric bodies, which they have to abandon as lifeless, because the impressions they once absorbed do not penetrate into modern consciousness. This is the disturbing impression received today by the candidate for initiation. Thus there is something within us that is withdrawn from the sovereignty of the soul. I beg that you will take these words with all earnestness. For a characteristic of modern humanity is that something in our nature is withdrawn from the rule of the soul, something that is dead in contrast with the life of the organism that surrounds it. And by working upon this dead part, the Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces exert upon humanity a very great influence in a quite special way. While on the one hand we can acquire more and more freedom, the Luciferic and Ahrimanic forces insinuate themselves precisely into that part of the organism which has been withdrawn from the sovereignty of the soul. That is why so many people in modern times feel, and quite rightly say they feel, as if there were two souls dwelling within their breast, and as if one wanted to tear itself away from the other. Much of what we moderns find so baffling in our inner experience lies in what has just been said. The Holy Grail was and is nothing else than what can so nurture the living portion of the soul that it can become master of the dead part. Mont Savat, the sanctuary of the Holy Grail, is the school in which one has to learn, for the sake of the living part of the human soul, something that there was naturally no need to learn in the Eastern and Egyptian mysteries. One needs to learn what has to be poured into the still living part of the soul in order to become master of the part of the physical body that has died, and the part of the soul that has become unconscious. Hence, in these secrets of the Grail, the Middle Ages saw something related to a repetition of the Greco-Latin period in the intellectual soul. For in the intellectual soul are rooted mostly those parts of the soul which are now forgotten and dead. Thus the secrets of the Grail referred to the permeation of the intellectual soul with new wisdom. When the initiate of the Middle Ages wanted to present in picture form what he had to learn in order to permeate with the new wisdom the part of his soul that had remained living, he spoke of the castle of the Holy Grail and of the new wisdom, which is in fact the Grail, that flows out from it. And when he wanted to indicate that which is hostile to this new wisdom, he pointed to another domain, the domain wherein dwelt all the beings and forces which had made it their task to gain access to the part of the body that had become dead, and to the part of the human soul that had become unconscious. This domain, into which were justly transferred, justly is here used in an esoteric sense, all the successors of the evil spiritual beings of earlier times who had preserved the worst forces of Oriental magic, not the best forces, which also had remained. The domain, which was the most vicious and hostile to the Grail, was Castle Merveille, the gathering place of all the forces which attack humans in this part of their bodies and souls, and have undergone a karmic fate such as has been indicated. Spiritual wisdom can be carried anywhere today, because we have reached a transition stage leading toward the sixth epoch, and these things are no longer tied to particular localities. But in the Middle Ages it had to be sought in certain definite places, as I have shown in my book titled The Spiritual Guidance of the Individual and of Humanity. Hence, when in earlier times it was said that one had to travel to a particular neighborhood in order to receive a certain teaching, this was not meant in any figurative sense. In our own time it must be said that wisdom has less of a local character, for we are living in a time of transition from life in space and time into more spiritual forms of time. Whereas it has been said that the castle of the Grail is situated in Western Europe, the stronghold of hostility to the Grail must be located in another place, a place where, on account of certain spiritual forces there, a person can have just as great and powerful and good an impression as he can have also of its opposite, through other forces, which have remained there to this present time, like an akashic after-effect, from those opponents of the Grail of whom we have been speaking. For at that place one can speak of the very worst forces, and they are still perceptible in their after-effects. At one time, evil arts were practiced in that place, arts which penetrated right into the physical life and thence launched their assaults on the part of the human soul that had become unconscious, and on the portion of the human organism that had become dead. All this is closely connected with a figure who glimmers across from the Middle Ages as a legendary being, but is well known to anyone acquainted with the nature of the mysteries, a personality who was quite real in the middle of the Middle Ages, Klingsor, the Duke of Terra de Labor, a district we have to look for in what is now southern Calabria. From there were carried out the incursions of the enemy of the Grail, especially over to Sicily, even as today if we tread Sicilian soil and have clairvoyant sight, we are aware of the akashic after-effects of the great Empedocles, still present in the atmosphere. So we can still perceive there the evil after-effects of Klingsor, who allied himself with his duchy of Terra de Labor across the Straits of Messina, with those enemies of the Grail who occupy the castle known in esotericism and in legend as Kalobabot. In the middle of the Middle Ages, Kalobabot in Sicily was the seat of the goddess called Iblis, the daughter of Eblis. Among all evil unions which have taken place within the earth's evolution between beings in whose souls there were esoteric forces, the one known to esotericism as the worst of all was between Klingsor and Iblis, the daughter of Eblis. Iblis, by her very name, is characterized as being related to Eblis, and in Mohammedan tradition, Eblis is the figure we call Lucifer. Iblis is a kind of feminine aspect of Eblis, the Mohammedan Lucifer, and with her the evil magician Klingsor united his own evil arts, through which in the Middle Ages he worked against the Grail. These things must needs find expression in pictures, but in pictures that correspond to realities. They cannot be expressed in abstract ideas. And the whole of the hostility to the Grail was enacted in that castle of Iblis, Kalobabot, whither the remarkable Queen Sibylla had fled with her son William in 1194, under the rulership of the Emperor Henry VI. Everything that was undertaken by a power hostile to the Grail, and whereby also Amfortas was wounded, is finally to be traced back to the alliance which Klingsor had contracted with the stronghold of Iblis, Kalobabot. All the mystery and suffering which we see embodied in the Grail legend through Amfortas, is an expression of that pact. For this reason, the soul must still be strongly armed, even today, when it comes into the neighborhood of those places from which can emanate all hostile influences related to the mysteries of the Grail and the advancing evolution of humanity. Viewed thus, we have on the one hand the kingdom of the Grail, and on the other the evil kingdom, Castle Marvile and all that came from the pact between Klingsor and Iblis playing into it. And here we can see expressed in a wonderfully dramatic form all that the most independent and innermost of the organs of the soul, the intellectual soul, has had to endure in face of attacks from without. In the fourth post-Atlantean period, this psychic principle was not yet as inward as it had to become in the fifth. It withdrew itself more from the life in the external world, which had prevailed in Greek and Roman times, back into human inwardness, and became freer, more independent. But on that account, for reasons already given, it was much more open to attack by all the powers than it had been in the Greco-Latin epoch. The whole of the change which had taken place in the intellectual soul is portrayed haltingly, in a legendary way, and yet it stands so dramatically before us in the antithesis between Montsalvat and Castle Merville. We feel an echo of all the sufferings and all the conquests of the intellectual soul in the stories connected with the Holy Grail. All that had to be changed in the human soul in more recent times is revealed to him who has come to know the nature of the mysteries. In this connection, we need only consider a concrete case. We often find that persons who have not gone far enough into the matter will ask how a man such as Goethe can, on the one hand, bear within him certain secrets of the human soul, and on the other hand, be so often torn by passion, as he is found to be by those who read his biography, in a rather superficial way. In fact, there was in Goethe something that can be called, in a crude sense, a double nature. To a superficial view, the two sides can hardly be brought into harmony. On the one hand, there is the great high-minded soul, who could bring forth certain portions of the second part of Faust and gave expression to many deep secrets of human nature in the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily. And one would like to forget everything one knows from biographies of Goethe and pay homage only to the soul who is capable of such achievements. On the other side, there appears in Goethe, tormenting him and often causing him pangs of conscience, his other nature, quote, human, all too human, close quote, in many respects. In earlier times, the two human natures were not so widely separate in their development. They could not diverge in this way. A person with a biography comparable with Goethe's could not rise to such heights as are revealed in certain passages of the second part of Faust, or in the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily, and at the same time be so divided in his soul. That was not possible in earlier times. It has become possible only in later days, because there now exists in human nature something we have already spoken of, the part of the soul that has become unconscious and the part of the organism that has died. The part that has remained alive can be so elevated and purified that the impulse which leads on to the title The Fairy Tale of the Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily can be nurtured there, while the other part may remain exposed to the attacks of the outer world. And because the forces described are able to make their abode there, circumstances may arise in which there is very little agreement with the higher ego of the person. It should be understood that the soul living in Goethe had once belonged to an Egyptian initiate, and had then lived in Greece as a sculptor and a disciple of philosophy. Then between this Greek incarnation and the one as Goethe, there comes an incarnation, probably only one, which I have not yet been able to find. If we keep this in mind, we can see how a soul who in former incarnations could rule us can be led downward, and then has to relinquish a part of total human nature, which then lies open to the influence of evil forces. That is what is mysterious and so hard to understand in a nature such as Goethe's. But by the same token, it brings to light many hidden aspects of the human soul in modern times. Everything brought about by the duality of human nature lays hold, in the first place, of the intellectual soul. And the intellectual soul divides into those two souls, whereof one can sink fairly deeply into matter, and the other can rise into the spiritual. Thus, in the Knights of King Arthur's Round Table, we are presented with a repetition of all that the candidate for initiation had in a certain sense to experience through the sentient soul. In all that was grouped around the Holy Grail, we are shown what can be experienced in modern times by the intellectual soul. Everything that we must now go through, so that we may make one part of our double nature strong enough to penetrate into the mysteries of the spiritual worlds in modern times, must be enacted in the consciousness soul. This is the new thing that has to be added. And that which has to be enacted in the consciousness soul is crystallized in the figure of Parsifal. All the legends connected with King Arthur and the Round Table represent the repetition of the experiences of earlier ages in the sentient soul. All the legends and narratives which are directly connected with the Holy Grail, apart from Parsifal, represent what the intellectual soul had to go through, and all that finds expression in the figure of Parsifal, this ideal of the later initiation, insofar as this later initiation is dependent on the consciousness soul, represents the forces which must especially be made our own through the consciousness soul. So the interaction of the three members of the soul in modern humanity is presented in a threefold legendary form. And just as we can discern deep secrets of the human soul in old legends, so can we now also sense in them deep secrets of the mysteries of the modern age. It is false to suggest that the nature of initiation has not changed since olden times, as though a present-day Westerner had to go through the same stages as did a person belonging either to the ancient or to the more modern East. Things are so that a characteristic belonging to an earlier epoch will persist into a later time for certain peoples. A much more important point is that the whole nature of modern initiation has a more inward character, makes greater demands on the innermost part of the human soul. But in a certain sense, it cannot directly approach the external part of human nature. Much more than in the old initiation, therefore, the external must be cleansed and purified through the strengthening of the inner, so that this inner part becomes lord over the outer. Asceticism and external training belong more to the character of the old initiation, a direct evolution of the soul itself, so that it develops strong forces in its inner being, belongs more to the nature of the newer initiation. And because external circumstances are such that only in the course of time will the lifeless elements of human nature be overcome, the elements which can so greatly disturb the initiate of today, we must say that in our time and on into the far future, there will still be many natures similar to that of Goethe, persons who with one part of their being rise up into the heights, while with the other part they are connected with the human all too human. Persons who in earlier incarnations showed no signs of these peculiarities, but on the contrary displayed a certain harmony between the outer and the inner, may enter fresh incarnations in which a deep disharmony can show itself between the external and the inner organization. Those who know the secrets of human incarnations will not feel confused in face of this disharmony, for in proportion as these things increase, the human faculty of judgment grows also, so that the old principle of authority comes to an end. Hence there will be an ever more insistent call to test the fruits of the mysteries. It would be more convenient to pay heed only to the external characteristics of those who have to teach, for then one would not need to ask whether the facts concerning them what they have to say and teach and do in a spiritual sense, are in line with human understanding and impartial logic. The duality of human nature is not in the very least to be defended. On the contrary, we must insist in the strictest sense on the rule of the soul over externals. But it must still be said that the facts which have been indicated are absolutely true for modern evolution. For the after effects of Klingsor and Iblis are still always present, even though in another form. A special feature of our time is that these attacks from Klingsor and Iblis, as they gradually lay hold of people, are insinuating themselves into intellectual life, particularly the intellectual life that bears on education, with its popularization of modern science. Consider what people have been learning for quite a long time now, and what they think it right to instill into children. Consider what is accepted as the basis of modern education. All this should not be judged in accordance with the views of someone who, believing he is very clever, says he understands these things and knows they are entirely correct. No, all this should be judged in accordance with how it influences and fructifies the soul, and in terms of the impressions it produces on the soul. And when a person becomes cleverer and cleverer, in the sense in which it is fashionable to call people clever today, he develops in his soul certain forces, which in this incarnation may make him very well able to dominate the conversation in circles wedded to materialistic or monistic ideas. But then certain vital forces, necessary for the human organism, are worn away. And when such a person has taken into himself only these typical dregs of modern education, in his next incarnation he will lack the forces that are required for properly building up the human organism. The cleverer a person is, by the standards of the time we are now facing, and the closer his intellectual attunement to it, the more of an imbecile will he be in a later incarnation. For those categories and concepts which relate only to the sense-perceptible outer world and to the ideas which hold it together, these concepts set up in the soul a configuration which may be ever so fine intellectually, but lacks the force to work intensively on the brain and to make use of it, and to be unable, while in the physical body, to make use of the brain is to be an imbecile. If it were true, as the materialists maintain, that the brain does the thinking, then one could certainly give them some comfort. But this is as false as the assertion that the speech center has formed itself. It has acquired its form through human beings having learned to speak, and so the speech center is the result of speech. Similarly, all cerebral activity, even in the historical past, is the result of thinking, not the other way about. The brain is plastically molded through thinking. If only such thoughts are developed as are customary today, if the thoughts are not permeated by the wisdom of the Spirit, then the souls occupied with thinking only about material things will find in later incarnations that they are unable to use their brains properly. The forces of their brains will be too weak to lay hold of things. A soul which is occupied today merely with calculating debit and credit, let us say, or with the usages of commercial and industrial life, or absorbs only the ideas of materialistic science, is filling itself with mental pictures which in later incarnations gradually darken the consciousness, because the brain would be an unformed mass, as today in cases of softening of the brain, and so no longer capable of being seized by the forces of thinking. Hence, for anyone who looks into these deeper forces of human evolution, everything that can live in the soul must be permeated by a spiritual comprehension of the world. So in this modern time, human nature may still be twofold. The forces belonging in particular to the consciousness soul must be infused with inner spiritual knowledge. Man must overcome the two regions through which Parsifal went. He must overcome, quote, apathy and doubt, close quote, in his own soul. For if he were to carry apathy and doubt with him over to a later incarnation, he would not make a success of it. Man must come to have knowledge of the spiritual worlds. Only through the fact that life widens out in the human soul, the life called Selde by Wolfram von Eschenbach, the very life that pours out spiritual knowledge over the consciousness soul, only by this means can human psychic development advance fruitfully from the fifth epoch onward into the sixth. These are among the fruits of the newer mysteries. They are the important and significant results which must be drawn from these mysteries, which are an after effect of the Grail mystery. But unlike all ancient mystery wisdom, they can be understood by the generality of people. For gradually the unconscious and dead forces of the soul and of the organism must be overcome through a strong permeation of the consciousness soul with spiritual knowledge. That is, with a knowledge that has been understood and grasped spiritually, not a knowledge built up on authority. Even such things as have been said in these lectures, if a person takes into account all that modern knowledge and education are able to give, can, when they are heard, be thoroughly understood and grasped, though they can be discovered only by one who gets to know the mysteries through clairvoyant sight. And they should be most thoroughly grasped. Now it may perhaps be true of many modern people who are striving to attain to higher worlds, that in the shape of their outer lives, something will still be visible of the human, all too human, or of his efforts to raise himself out of it. Yes, it may well be that the fool's motley is still discernible through the raiment of the spiritual, as with Parsifal. But that is not the point. What matters is that there should be present in the soul the impulse toward spiritual knowledge, spiritual understanding, that impulse which is inextinguishable in Parsifal, and brings him at last, in spite of everything, to the castle of the Holy Grail. In the whole picture drawn of Parsifal, if rightly understood, we can find all the different methods of training the consciousness soul which are necessary to evoke from it the right effects, so that the person can gain control of the forces which whirl in confusion and strive against one another in the intellectual soul. The more present-day individuals look into themselves and try to exercise honest self-knowledge, the more will they find how conflict is raging in their souls. It is a conflict within the intellectual soul. For self-knowledge is a harder thing than many people suppose, and it will indeed become more and more difficult. Someone tries to acquire self-knowledge, but even if he is able to discipline himself in many respects and to build up his character, he will very often notice at critical moments how in his innermost depths the most deeply hidden passions and forces are raging, and how they tear apart the domain of the intellectual soul. And how is it with moderns who devote themselves seriously to knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge? The difficulties of the inner life may perhaps never dawn on people who believe that real knowledge is to be found in external scientific work and its fruits. But anyone who takes the search for knowledge seriously and from worthy motives will be in a different situation once they look with real insight into their inner being. They seek in this or that field of knowledge, seek, and seek also in life to come to terms with the diverse aspects of human living. After searching for a while, they think they know something, and then they search further. And the more they search with the means normally available today, the more do they feel themselves torn into pieces, the more do they feel drawn into doubt. And people who, having acquired a present-day education, confess to themselves that in spite of all this education they really know nothing, are often just the people who strive most earnestly and worthily for spiritual knowledge. In truth, there can be no one with any depth of soul today who does not experience this gnawing doubt. and it is something they ought to be familiar with, for only then will they immerse themselves in that spiritual knowledge which is right for the consciousness soul, and must pour itself out into the intellectual soul in order to be master there. Hence we must try to penetrate with rational understanding into what is brought to the consciousness soul from out of esoteric knowledge. By this means we shall draw into our inner being such a self as will be a real Lord and Master there. And then, when we come to know the nature of the modern mysteries, we shall stand confronting ourselves. Anyone who approaches the mysteries today must feel that they are confronting themselves in such a way that they will strive after the virtues of Parsifal, while knowing that because of the modern conditions already described, and because they are people of modern times, they are in fact someone else also, the wounded Amfortas. People of our time carry within them this double nature, aspiring Parsifal, wounded Amfortas. That is what their self-knowledge must lead them to feel. Then from this recognition will flow the forces which out of duality must make a unity, and so should bring us a little further on in the course of evolution. In our intellectual soul, in the depths of our inner life, there must be a meeting between Amfortas, wounded in body and soul, and Parsifal, whose task is to cultivate the consciousness soul. And it is entirely true to say that in order to gain freedom for ourselves, we must go through the wounding of Amfortas and become acquainted with the Amfortas within ourselves, so that we may also come to know Parsifal. Just as it was right for Egyptian times that one should rise up into the spiritual worlds in order to know Isis, so is it right for our times to start with the spirituality, the spiritual nature of this world, and through it to rise into the higher spiritual worlds. A wish to deny the Amfortas nature is not a true characteristic of our time. It is because we moderns are so fond of surrounding ourselves with Maya that we want to deny Amfortas. For how delightful it sounds when we hear it said, quote, humanity is always advancing, close quote. Yes, but this advance follows a very tortuous path. And in order to develop the forces of Parsifal in human nature, the Amfortas nature in us must be recognized. So, in this cycle of lectures, using legends from which I have tried to call forth pictures of deep processes of the soul, I have sought above all to lead your deeper premonitions, at least in some degree, toward the nature of the modern mysteries. Perhaps one day we shall have opportunity to speak in still clearer words, if that can be, of what the nature of the modern mysteries discloses concerning the dual nature which we bear within ourselves, concerning Amfortas and Parsifal. The end of Lecture 4. All these lectures were translated by Charles Davy. This was Collected Works, Volume 144 by Dr. Rudolf Steiner. The Mysteries of Initiation, From Isis to the Holy Grail, 4 lectures, given in Berlin between the 3rd and the 7th of February, 1913.
Organic and dairy-free? Woo!
Here we go.
At Sprouts, our shelves are filled with new, exciting, and delicious discoveries. This is that Sprouts feeling.
I'm Derek, and I'm 55 years old. And for years, I've been inactive due to knee pain. At my last checkup, I was told I need to get moving again. To help me prepare for my first 5K, my run club suggested I check out Roadrunner Sports. A fit expert took me to the perfect fit zone. Wow, the technology they used. The 3D foot scan, the treadmill analysis, it was awesome. With new shoes and custom insoles, I'm walking on clouds. No more knee pain. Now I'm back, living an active lifestyle.